Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. That's a great lead-in to talking about Tammy. Did you know that?
Why is that, Tim?
Well, see, Tammy and her mother, back in the early days, started a BBS called Tammy BBS.
Oh, interesting.
And these used to run, back in the early days of the internet, they would have this, it was back in the early days, they would have a group where you would dial in to a modem service and you would connect to other people and you would share files and you would have chat and you could play games. And Tammy and her mother used to run one of these bulletin board services.
Oh,
I assume they had a number of modems, right, hooked up.
Yeah.
Yeah, so and that's how the internet back was started. Was you would dial up with your phone with your little hardware handshake kind of noises, and your 14.4 modem or your 28 baud modem, and
that was pretty progressive and forward of them, because back in those days that was not a typical business for a mother and daughter to have.
Well, her mother is a bit of a she's a bit of a techie too, right? So,
oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, they're big time Mac users, right?
Yeah, well, it must have been if she had the bulletin board.
Yep. Yeah, but then also on top of the bulletin board thing, Tammy's a bit of what we call a multi-potentialite, where she dabbles in a lot of different things, and she's sort of has expertise in more than one particular field, right? So, as we know, she's sort of on the podcast. She's our go-to person for gaming tech, right? She's the one that's made the most games in her career, and she's a champion of Apple's Sprite Kit and Scene Kit, among other things, right? Unity and those kind of things. So, and she's done a number of games. She did a couple of. If you go online and search for a gameplay kit instruction or tutorials or how-tos, her name often comes up related to her Linda course that was up there for a long time.
She ought to write a book on that stuff.
She's actually written several books on gaming, now that you mention that, Mark.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can think of a few titles off the top of my head, but she did a 2D game system and a 3D game system with her partner, Chris Langwich, and out of Australia, I believe. And I think this book we're talking about right now is one that she's just freshly written, right?
No, very fresh. And I definitely do think it's pretty appropriate to have something that is pulling together different techniques and different technologies, to have that sort of book put together by somebody who, as you guys were alluding to earlier, sort of like a Renaissance person, right? It's not just like a one-trick pony. This is somebody who has skills in multiple different areas and can synthesize and pull that information together and present it, from all of the material that I've seen, as something that is easy to understand and is, well and thoughtfully organized.
Right.
Yeah, especially for a game. I mean, you really need to be able to pull in different pieces of media, into this thing. I mean, you need the coding, but you also need a story for the game, or at least some gameplay or puzzles or whatever it is. You need the graphical assets. You need some audio, most likely. Maybe you need to have some text copy and all that. So all these different pieces that come together to make a good game. So it does make sense to have someone who has a lot of different interests and experiences.
Yeah, and as an artist, she's constantly drawing, and so she creates the artwork for her games and that kind of stuff too. And I think I met her through RayWonderlick.com, where we were both doing tech writing, and she was actually one of the co-hosts of the original Ray Wonderlick podcast. And but I was interested in writing a book, and we had just started the podcast ourselves, and so I think we had a gap one day where nobody was available, and I just happened to start a chat with Tammy, and we fired up the microphones and recorded it, and turned it into sort of a crossover episode between Roundabout Creative Chaos and More Than Just Code, and we talked about writing books, and you can still find that episode, if you go back into the archives of More Than Just Code. But yeah, so Tammy and I have been talking about writing and editing. She's basically my go-to editor as well. Like whenever I write things, I throw them at her to have a look at. She's quite good at that. So, and she's also the sleeping host on More Than Just Code.
To the point where we've claimed like you can never really know for certain if she was on an episode or not, because it sort of depends on whether she was in the introductions. And even then, that may not always be the case, because sometimes she'll be able to join us because she's got some free time while we're happen to still be recording.
And it's always good to get a fresh perspective. A lot of times when we do some of our recap shows, like the year-end ones or around WWDC, it's always good to get her perspective on the gaming side. Because like I said earlier, that's her interest, right? And, we all have our own focus. I'd sort of tend to be on the more art side. And Jaime's a game player, so he sort of focuses from that point of view. And Mark, you're more deep into the code and the nuts and bolts of things, right? And Tammy's our game expert, I guess, right?
Yeah, and funny enough, given the way you described it there, I think quite accurately, the person who sort of pulls it together from those sort of different sort of strengths that you mentioned that the rest of the hosts have, Tammy brings those together. Yeah, I think pretty well. It's actually pretty interesting to have somebody who's able to do that sort of end-to-end way of building stuff like games, because it's a little different than apps. And that, you probably have some, art design and other stuff for your app, but I think you have ever so much more within games. And then for code, you have, I think always have to worry about performance issues and et cetera, but I think even more so in games. So it's definitely an interesting area to be looking at and to have a book for.
Yeah, for sure. And, even though she started out life as a Jersey girl, she was an Army brat and traveled around a bit, and now she's settled down in Tennessee, and she sort of represents the southern side of our show in terms of that in terms of the four corners, right? I'm sort of in the northeast, and Jaime's the northwest, and Mark's down south in California, and Tammy holds up to the other end of the continent, I guess, right?
I don't know that I'd call California the South.
Well, yeah, that's true. But you're on the left coast anyway, so southern left coast.
Yep.
In this, parallelogram. Well, no, actually, I guess it depends on where Toronto is relative to your spot in Tennessee. But I imagine it as being, this four-sided polygon that doesn't necessarily have a regular shape. It's not quite as four corners of the continent. But I get what you were saying, Tim.
Yeah, it's funny, I was looking at the map since all this COVID stuff happened, and, Tammy's always joking about the zombie apocalypse coming, and this is kind of sort of the rehearsal, I guess, right? And when I look at the map, I'm actually closer to Tammy than I am to either of you two guys.
Yeah,
geographically,
for sure.
That is.
For sure.
Anyway, all right. I think it's enough. We can...
Real-time follow-up. Quadrilateral was the word I was looking for, I think.
Oh, I was thinking more like a rhombus or...
Like a four-sided...
Polygon was definitely.
Four-sided polygon with no right angles, which I think is accurate in our case.
Rhombus or... What did you say?
Quadrilateral is the first one I was able to Google for. Four-sided polygon with no right angles.
I think... Oh, yeah, because we have to have like... Yeah, I guess it's the same sort of thing as a rhombus, isn't it? A rhombus is even sides on both sides, right? Like two even sides, I think.
I think so. And a parallelogram has each of the facing sides are parallel to each other.
Oh, yeah, so then it's not a rhombus I'm thinking of. Anyway, it's been a long time since geometry.
Oh, let's see what a rhombus is.
Both are relevant here, right? Because like if Mark was down in like L.A. or San Diego, it'd be close enough, I think, to call it a rectangle.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, a rhombus is a quadrilateral whose four sides all have the same length.
Oh, same length. Okay, yeah, right.
So a parallelogram could be a rhombus, or a rhombus could be a parallelogram, I suppose, both.
Right.
Although... But
you could have a parallelogram that's not a rhombus, right?
For sure you could, yep. And you could also have a rhombus that was not a parallelogram.
So where does quadrilateral fit in?
Quadrilateral is the most general, I think, is any four-sided shape.